AI governance is one of the hottest topics in artificial intelligence, but defining what it means, or what's being governed, isn't so easy. At its simplest, AI governance is a system of rules and frameworks that are meant to ensure the use of this tech lines up with our values and principles. Sometimes these are things that are legally required, and other times come in the form of social and ethical norms and standards. How this gets done, and whether it's even possible to build safe, trustworthy AI and innovation systems that are also privacy protecting, it's a massive question we're only just beginning to wrap our heads around. I'm Jennifer Strong, and this is Shift.
Now here on the steering column is a device called Auto Cruise. You simply set the speed you want.
Self-driving robo-taxis are already on the road in 2 U.S. cities.
As the disc rotates, a mirror reflects the light in the way that depends on how the signal was recorded.
This is the 100 terabyte I present to you Electro, the Moto Man.
Ladies and gentlemen.
I would say that one of my greatest skills is my ability to interact with humans.
This episode, we're joined by privacy officers from Google, Microsoft, Meta, and IBM to learn about how they approach AI governance. It was taped in Boston in front of a live audience at the general meeting of the International Association of Privacy Professionals. It's a nonpartisan, nonprofit group with more than 50,000 members.
Hackers and cybercriminals have always held this kind of special fascination.
Obviously, I can't tell you too much about what I do.
It's a game. Who's the best hacker? And I was like, well, this is child's play.
I'm Dina Temple-Raston, and on the Click Here podcast, you'll meet them and the people trying to stop them.
We're not afraid of the attack. We're afraid of the creativity and the intelligence of the human being behind it.
Click Here, stories about the people making and breaking our digital world.
AI machines. Satellite. Engine ignition.
Click here.
And liftoff.
Every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Julie Brill. I am Microsoft's Chief Privacy Officer, and I'm in charge of global privacy, safety, and regulatory affairs at Microsoft. And prior to that, I was a commissioner during the Obama administration at the U.S. Federal Trade Commission for 6 years.
I'm Keith Enright. I serve as Google's Chief Privacy Officer. In that capacity, I look after our worldwide legal teams supporting privacy and consumer protection.
Christina Montgomery. I'm the Vice President and Chief Privacy Officer and Chief Privacy and Trust Officer at IBM. In addition to the privacy program, I co-chair our AI Ethics Board.
And I'm Rob Sherman. I'm Deputy Chief Privacy Officer for Policy at Meta. Been at the company about 10 years and have worked on our policies around privacy and data protection, but also innovation, including artificial intelligence. So looking forward to the conversation today.
I'd like to get us started just by having each of you tell us what AI governance, what it means to you and to your company.
Well, AI governance is the foundation of building trust in our technology. And it is closely related to what we do with respect to all of the, what I'll call regulatory domains or domains of concern in society, whether it's privacy, cybersecurity, digital safety, accessibility. In many ways, ensuring that we have appropriate governance systems is really what gives us the ability to act in the world. If we don't create systems that are transparent, that are documented, that are explainable, and that lead to wonderful results in terms of productivity, in terms of delighting people, in terms of experimentation and creativity, if we don't have the foundation of governance, we don't really have the license to do all of those wonderful things for society at all. So from our perspective, from my personal perspective, governance, internal systems and controls is really the key building block upon which kind of all of this is built?
At Google, we've been saying for many years that we are an AI-first company. Our CEO has been quite strident and vocal in saying that we believe these technologies have the potential to have a more profound effect on human society and civilization than even the discoveries of fire or electricity. When you're making statements like that publicly, you are creating a very real sense of responsibility. So when you hear Google engage in this space, when we're talking about the need for responsible governance in the area of AI, what we're talking about is how do we proceed responsibly, but also with an appropriate level of boldness so that we maintain optimism, forward momentum, so that we can deliver the benefits of these profoundly promising technologies to users all over the world, but that we do it in a way that is appropriately transparent, that we're demonstrably accountable, and that ultimately we're going to be able to show that we were on the right side of history, we were behaving appropriately, we were doing the right thing, and we were delivering products and services in a manner that was consistent with our values and with the AI principles that we've published.
Similarly, at IBM, we're, I think, the world's oldest technology company. We've been around for more than a century. And trust has been our license to operate from the beginning. So from the perspective of your original question, AI governance, I often think about it in two parts. First, I think about sort of that organizational governance, going back to sort of what Keith described, which is, okay, you have principles, you have policies about how you are going to deploy technology and use data, by the way, because that's fundamental to all of this, right, in a responsible, trusted, transparent way. You have to hold yourselves accountable as an organization to that. So I think about it as organizational governance. What are the policies? What are the accountability mechanisms and the like? But then with AI systems, model management comes into this as well, right? So once you create and deploy AI, this is unique in terms of the systems will learn over time. So what governance do you have that can ensure that you are deploying a system that is in alignment with your objectives, that remains in alignment with your objectives over the life cycle? So there's definitely a component with this technology that's a little bit unique as well from a governance perspective.
And I mentioned earlier that I've been at Meta for more than a decade at this point, and AI has been a really critical part of what we've done for that time. Things like making sure that when you look at your Facebook or newsfeed or Instagram, you're seeing things that are relevant to you, but also helping us combat harmful content and spot people who are violating or who are posting violating content. So AI is a really core part of it. I think we're getting to a place now, I think all of us are experiencing a real shift, and a lot of why we're here is because of the growth of generative AI. All these things are really beneficial to society and have real promise for making our lives better. But at the same time, there are real questions about how to make sure that we build them responsibly and thoughtfully. And so when I think about AI governance, it's really about having a structured way of building things that create value for people, but doing it in a responsible way that in a structured way thinks about considerations like how do we build in a way that's privacy protective and de-identify data that's used in model training? How do we think about safety and make sure that our AI systems create more safety in the world and don't put people at risk? And how do we think about being transparent in making sure that people understand how AI systems are affecting them and have the ability to control that? So we use a structure that we call 5 Pillars of Responsible AI, which we publish on our website to kind of structure that decision making. But I think about AI governance as sort of the process behind how we make those decisions.
I won't ask each of you to answer every single question, but it's helpful right now for level setting as we get started. Let's talk about the landscape. There's been a lot of regulatory progress lately, a lot of different frameworks. How are your companies adjusting and planning?
You're looking at me, so I think this may be. This was an incredible week, actually. Just leaving aside what's been going on for months, and some of us have been involved in the regulatory governance space or the AI governance space 7 years plus. But this week in particular was really exciting. So the White House issued an executive order on Monday. The G7 issued a series of principles and guidance. Wednesday and Thursday, there was an incredible summit that brought together stakeholders, policymakers, CEOs from around the world that were focused on AI issues and driving forward in terms of developing some commitments that came out of that. And here we are in Boston at an IAPP AI governance conference. I mean, it's really been a remarkable week. I would say that what we're seeing, in my view, from all of this activity, not just this week, but also what's been happening over the past several months, is a convergence around a couple of key thoughts. Number one is that we do need to have AI thrive. I think that what we're seeing, especially coming out of the principles that have been developed this week in the communications, including the White House executive order, is that it's going to be very important to ensure that AI succeeds and that governments want it to be developed and to be developed appropriately. And then what we have are these series of ideas around what needs to happen in order to make AI that reality. And I've honestly been incredibly encouraged. I think that all of these governments are taking a look at what Europe has been now working on for quite some time in terms of the AI Act, are taking pieces that seem to completely make sense and need to be built upon, and also infusing into this entire domain new ideas. I think new ideas that really represent the reality about some of the concerns around AI and trying to address those. Things like putting in place safety systems, making sure that there's more red teaming going on, ensuring that the red teaming, the reports that come out of the red teams get reported to governments.
And do you mind explain what a red team is in case somebody doesn't know?
I do not mind at all. A red team is actually a really important concept. We've been using them for quite some time. I'm sure I'm not saying anything new to the people up here on the panel. So a red team is a team that sits outside of the product team or the group of engineers that are developing a particular product or feature that has, in this case, AI. But we also have red teams in terms of security. We have red teams sometimes in terms of privacy. So you have a group of specialists, people who understand the domain and understand the technology, but they're not part of the development team, and they don't report up to the executives that are responsible for, if I may say, the P&L, the profit and loss or the return on investment for a particular product. So red teaming is super important. It's basically saying we're going to check ourselves. I mean, these are employees within very large companies, but they have a different responsibility. In some ways, you could look at them as sort of bug hunters, people that they do well when they find problems. And that's what you want. You want people who are motivated to find problems so that we can start to fix them as soon as we see them. And red teaming is actually brought up in the executive order, yes. Remarkably so. So what I'm saying is, the EU AI Act lays out a set of principles. It is a risk-based approach. It is a broad horizontal provision. But now what we're seeing are governments, multi-stakeholder groups, and others really diving in and providing suggestions, commitments, and requirements that deal with some of these higher risk issues and the issues that I think are currently worrying folks.
Mm-hmm. So, agree with everything that Julie was saying. I would add a little bit, sort of zooming out for just a second. It's probably not lost on anyone in this audience. If you look at the four people on stage here, we represent fierce competitors at one level, but we are also part of a community. Like, we have worked together for probably nearly half a century on issues of protecting users, advancing privacy, helping the ecosystem mature to a higher level for data protection. When we look at what is happening in the world right now, when we look at the activities that Julie was describing just this week, the executive order, the meetings in the United Kingdom, the G7 statement, one thing that we're seeing two things in those activities. One, there is a shared acknowledgement that there are challenges to be responsibly explored and addressed. And I think there's a very sincere commitment from the public sector, from government actors, as well as from significant corporate interests. We are going to need to work together on this to deliver the benefits of these technologies to users around the world and to do it in a responsible way. The other thing that I think is interesting that's probably less obvious is there's a validation in all of this engagement. The fact that so many things are happening at the political level around the world is a very strong signal that you have alignment from very sophisticated people in governments geographically distributed around the world. There is in fact something incredibly potentially promising and disruptive here. This is no longer just sort of slogans from large for-profit entities. This is some of the brightest minds and greatest thinkers around the world saying, let's get together and pay attention to this. There is something very significant that we should be collectively applying our effort, our intellect, and our attention to.
Yeah, and I guess I would just add, just building on everything that's been said so far. This is a moment when we are seeing these conversations align. And I think that's what's really important. Like fundamentally, yes, there are differences and there will be differences in the way that jurisdictions around the world ultimately implement rules regarding AI technology, but there's a lot of commonality here in terms of just principles like using quality data, having risk management, bringing in multi-stakeholder conversations, which I think is also critically important, like the research, the investments in research that are part of the White House executive order, the recognition that governments and civil society and research institutions and academia and companies all need to come together to better understand and implement technology and plug the gaps where there might not be solutions today, because there's been a lot of attention and research into how do we make these really large models and how do we deploy them in ways that I think will unlock a tremendous amount of value. And now we're coming back to these conversations that say, well, we can't do any of this if we don't have trust and if people and our citizens don't feel safe. So we need to come together as public, private, academia, and the like, and focus on these trust issues. So I see all of these developments as very promising, but also very aligned in many ways.
You know, Jennifer, one thing that just listening to the conversation that we're having here, each of us has talked in one way or another about this idea of trust and responsibility and living up to the trust that the world has placed in our organizations. But I think it's important also to call out, you know, a lot of the decisions that we're talking about here are not decisions that any one company can or even should make alone. And so the kinds of collaboration that we're talking about, I think, is actually really foundational, maybe more than any other technology that we've talked about in spaces like this, to working together, not just on identifying the problems, but working on the solutions. So Julie talked about red teaming. Something that we did, and I know a number of other companies have done, is submitted our large language model Llama to red teaming externally at the DEF CON Hacker Conference in partnership with the White House and a bunch of others in different sectors. Because even if you have a bunch of really well-intentioned people whose job is to find problems, as Julie said, there's no way that any one group of people is going to find all of the problems. And so working with an adversarial group of people to spot those things beforehand so they can be addressed is really important. Another example of this, Denise Wong, who introduced us from the Singapore IMDA, their office has been working on, has published a paper on benchmarks for evaluating AI for things like trustworthiness and safety. And actually going from, hey, we know we need to be safe, or we know we need to reduce bias in AI, to how can we test our models to see whether they address those issues and actually are meeting the needs of the society and the people who are using them. That's a really critical piece. And we're still very early in that. I mean, I think actually one of the big areas of work is to move from, hey, we need fair and unbiased AI, to what does that actually look like and how do we know if it exists? So I think the work in Singapore is sort of one early step along that line, but I think that's a particular area of focus.
Can I just jump in for 2 seconds to build on something that both Keith and Christina said? You know, the cooperation, Keith is right, we are fierce competitors. Keith and I are also really good friends. That can happen in the world, just to make sure everybody knows this. But much more importantly than the personal relationships that we have all built over decades, just as Keith said, we are starting to see cooperation among these companies to deal with some of these really hard problems. So I just want to mention a couple of the organizations that I think are really impactful in this space that all of us or some of us belong to. So there's been the Partnership for AI for quite some time. That's been a place where we've been able to talk about governance issues, and I know we'll dig into that. A new organization that was really just launched in the last, 10 days or so, was the Frontier Model Forum. I know you're going to ask me to define frontier models.
Well, yes.
And we talked about this. A frontier model are those models that are highly advanced. In many ways, I think the further definition of it is an oxymoron because it talks about it's so advanced that no one's ever seen it before, and yet here we are, we see it. So it's like, doesn't quite match up. But a frontier model are those models that are really kind of the next gen each and every time it comes out, the next generation. But so we have a frontier model forum that both Google and Microsoft and others belong to so that we can talk about, some of these ideas about how we can really ensure that we're developing these in a trustworthy way. I also want to mention something that Jane, our prior speaker, may be happy to hear, that there are other companies, Microsoft being one of them, that are developing content provenance technology. It's called a Coalition for Content Provenance and Authentication, CCPA. And what this group is doing is developing specs for watermarking so that when you see an image, or ultimately, hopefully, when you see a book, you will know whether it has been AI generated or not. Now, this is in early stages. It's still in development, but we've actually deployed this for our image creator. And it's just one of those ways that, in a very visual manner, we can explain to the world whether an image has been generated by AI or whether it is generated by an artist or a creator or otherwise. So it's something that is, again, a multi-company effort. And these are the kinds of things that I think that we're going to need going forward. But this is an industry, I'll just say one more thing real quick. It's an industry that has often cooperated around standards. We've cooperated in terms of working with NIST. We've cooperated in terms of working with ISO, developing standards. So this isn't really new, but what's important is adding this layer in terms of AI, particularly because there's so much to dive into here.
Sticking with this for just a moment, something I hear a lot in my work is kind of a hand-wringing around, there's a lot of frameworks, there's a lot of movement, there are all these things. How do you address the uncertainty?
Yeah, no, I think there's certainly uncertainty in terms of how we solve some of the challenges, and that requires further research along things like watermarking, content generation, and the like. But overall, the way we approach it, because we've been at this for a number of years now, building out AI governance, which we talked about at the beginning, right? There's just common approaches that if you take a risk management approach, you will have to adapt to all of the different specificities in these regulations over time as they come out. But for the most part, you're 90% of the way there. Like if you start building in, as I talked about at the beginning, having a decision-making process that first aligns with, okay, these are the types of technologies we're going to use or not use, or develop or not develop. We have a decision-making process around that involves our AI ethics board. We have processes around how you sort of embed ethics by design, which go a long way to addressing a lot of the requirements that we're going to see more specific regulation around, like bias and explainability and fairness. And so over time, if you've got this approach and this management system, you'll just have to tweak, I believe, for a lot of these regulations. So that's another reason why I always say, don't stop. I think that one of the fears and challenges with respect to companies who are thinking about this for the first time or too afraid to maybe start adopting AI is, how are we ever going to comply with what's happening in terms of regulation around the world? And I think if you start now with data governance, with AI governance, build on your privacy programs, which is part of what we've done too, and that's why there's so many privacy professionals in this room too, you will be 90% of the way there.
One other thing that I think is really important, and something that we think a lot about, is really thinking about our responsibility from a compliance perspective in terms of products, in terms of solutions. And so we have this approach that we call regulatory readiness at the company. I'll talk about it in the context of AI, but it's broader than that. And really what it is thinking about the different pieces of legislation or different pieces of regulation as trying to solve specific problems. So think youth privacy or transparency and control, or these kinds of things, and thinking about what are solutions that we can build that address the underlying concerns that are reflected here. So some of the things that we've been talking about here are, for bias and fairness. How do you actually measure racial bias, for example, in a machine learning model? Building technology to allow a developer to do that, and then figuring out how to correct for it where you need to correct for it. That's technology that didn't exist before and that we've been working to prototype. Another example is coming out of a project that we've done called Open Loop, which basically works with governments and small and large companies to kind of prototype solutions to problems. How do we built something called AI system cards. It's basically a way of explaining to people how AI systems that they interact with use data and make decisions and what they can do to control them. And so one of the things I think very aligned, Christina, with what you said is breaking down these sort of these problems into discrete areas where you can have a group of experts working on them and building solutions. And not to say that any one of us has this locked and we have solved all of the problems. I think the reason that all of us are here at this conference is because there are a lot of open questions that we still need to work through. But I think focusing on identifying challenges, building groups of experts, and then deploying solutions that can help move the ball forward is a really critical piece of this.
Yeah, I would just add, I think pulling on a thread that Christina introduced, of course we are facing uncertainty in the future, right? The future is by definition uncertain. Those of us who have been working in technology for the last couple of decades recognize many things happen that we didn't anticipate, and people around the world have been in part surprised and delighted by that, and in some ways things have been disrupted. We've had to react to things that we didn't necessarily anticipate going in. I also think gratitude is something that we don't come back to in this conversation as frequently as we probably should. We do spend a lot of time hand-wringing about risks and uncertainty in the future and all the things that could go wrong. I actually think it's important that we come back to several themes that have come up at this wonderful event across the last couple days. The law actually has anticipated uncertainty in the future, right? We have legal requirements, we have legal systems that require companies to have compliance programs in place, to take appropriate risk mitigations. Like, the foundation is already there. We are not starting from a cold start, from sort of a flat zero. We need to look at the tools, systems, capabilities that we already have in place, recognize that they're an incredibly solid foundation to prepare us for what comes next, and then look at all of the unique benefits of the moment that we're in. When I think about the work we've done on data protection for the last 20 years, everyone talked about these features like technology was moving so quickly, we can't possibly keep up. The law was struggling to keep up with the pace of technological change. Users kept surprising us because they were using technology in novel and unanticipated ways. All of those things prepared us for the moment we are in right now. Our journey across data protection for the last 2 decades has forged pretty strong relationships between the private sector and data protection authorities to communicate openly and candidly and transparency about the challenges that we see technology presenting down the line. All of those relationships are going to be immensely valuable in helping us each advance our respective missions in the chapter that's coming next. And I would actually say there is an alignment of interest right now that I actually think is unprecedented in my own experience. When I look at my regulatory counterparts on the other side of the table, for the first time in my career, they're actually trying to sort out their role in the world at the same time we are. We have data protection authorities that are trying to discern what is their role in advancing their important work in protecting the citizens of their jurisdiction within the remits of their existing statutory authority. How do they do that, given the state of uncertainty? Well, we in the private sector, we've been living in that exact same space for a while now. This is an opportunity for unprecedented collaboration and cooperation, and we can build an even stronger community, which will set us all up for success.
Super interesting. Julie, you had something you wanted to add?
As a former regulator, I know the regulators will figure it out. I could just tell you that. They will work together. They will figure this out. Their legislators will figure it out. There is, though, a foundation upon which to build. We do have laws already. But the uncertainty that I wanted to talk about was the uncertainty that probably a lot of people in this room have and also that a lot of people around the world have in terms of how do they really deploy this? How can they engage in this moment, which is an incredible moment? It reminds me of that Hamilton song, the song in Hamilton, look around, look around, look around. I'm not going to sing it for you, but
I'm here for it.
Okay, yeah. But I do think it's an incredible moment, and we do need to have gratitude. But the question that I think we have from a lot of companies that want to engage is, well, what about copyright? And like, how do I actually even do this? You know, you've been doing this, Microsoft, Google, et cetera, you know, you've been doing this for a really long time. How do we do it? And as a platform, we feel that it's our responsibility to share this information. Then there's things, like I said, copyright, where from our perspective, this is going to be an issue that's going to go on for a while. Just to be super honest, the courts will have to figure this out, just as they did with respect to patents in software. Took a couple of decades to figure out how to sort out a bunch of patent issues. And so what we've said to our customers is, look, you use our co-pilots correctly, you do it the way that we advise you to do it, we will take on the copyright risk. It will be on us. You're using our product, we will deal with the copyright problems. So I think that, you know, there are ways that platforms need to step up and really provide these kinds of solutions to deal with the uncertainty. But there's one other uncertainty that I think we'd be really remiss if we don't talk about, and that's the global South. There's a lot of conversation here that is awesome and really impactful. There, at least half of the world is uncertain whether they will ever be able to engage with AI, whether there will ever be the infrastructure to help them leapfrog their economies so that they can be better and provide better services for all of their people. So, you know, it actually begins with electricity. That's a really hard problem. That's going to take the world to come together to help solve. There's data center infrastructure, and that's something that we're leaning into to really try to address the gaps in the global South so that they can partake in this.
We'll be back right after this.
Because you're listening to this podcast, I'm assuming you're interested in staying on top of the latest trends, news, and more. So I want to tell you about another show. It's called Web3 with A16Z Crypto, but it's really about the future of the internet, future of creators, future of business, future of the way we work and live. It's for anyone seeking to understand the latest tech trends direct from experts with high insights per minute, given your time and attention are so valuable. Follow Web3 with A16Z in your podcast app now.
So we have basically flown through this time, do you see? So I have like 4 or 5 more questions that I really want to get to, so we'll see what we can do about it. But I think it could be helpful for people in the room to talk a little bit about where AI governance sits within an organization, you know, what functions are involved, what groups, how does this work?
I sit next to you, so I get to go first all the time. So I'm happy to. Microsoft is big, and so we approach all of our governance in a federated way. We have centralized teams for cybersecurity, for privacy, for digital safety, for accessibility, for telecom. Many of them roll up to me, not cyber. But we've designed our AI governance in the same way, where we have a core team that is run by our Chief Responsible AI Officer, and her team develops internal policies and internal approaches. And then we federate out to all of our product teams individuals who are executives who are responsible for ensuring that there's compliance with our internal policies. And then we have engineers and others who are trained in these areas. Now, there's a fair amount of overlap between, for instance, privacy and responsible AI, or cybersecurity and digital safety, which is actually a good thing. But what we also want to make sure of is that everyone understands what they're required to do. So we have a standard. It's an internal standard. We've actually published this. We've asked for people to comment on it, and we have gotten a lot of comments on it. It's been written up in the New York Times. Our internal standard, it's called a responsible AI standard, is the, if you will, sort of guiding principles that then all of these regulatory teams inside the company for internal regulatory compliance, they abide by. We also have all sorts of documentation. It's one thing to comply. It's another thing to document your compliance. And documentation is super important. And it's also going to be required by many of these laws. So things like impact assessments, very much borrowed from how data protection impact assessments or transfer impact assessments are done. We also do responsible AI impact assessments. And these too, we make available publicly so that people can look at them, look at our templates, and understand what are the questions we ask ourselves when we're developing this kind of documentation.
Anybody else feel strongly they want to chime in?
I would say, unsurprisingly, our system is very, very similar in the sense that AI is increasingly animating everything we do across every product and service that Google offers. Therefore, all of our product leadership is well informed as to our AI principles, and we have controls operating at every level of the organization to ensure that risk is being appropriately assessed, that legally required documentation is being completed so that we can demonstrate our compliance, that people can hold us accountable for adhering to the representations that we've made publicly and with the principles that we've advocated publicly. I would also say that this is going to be an evolving space, right? We are right now relying upon the way that we have thought about risk and compliance for many years. Those structures are appropriate. They help us make good decisions. They help us behave in a responsible and accountable way. But given the velocity of technological change, I fully expect that we're going to see policies, procedures, and protocols continue to evolve to make sure that we're getting it right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would add and build upon what's been said. So we similarly have a federated model. Our AI governance core team is sitting within privacy, but it's very much integrated. We have an integrated approach, which means we have the chief data office very involved in helping us build out tools and the like. We have assigned accountability from every business unit, and we look at it from the perspective, because we're not a platform company, right? We're enabling our enterprise clients to create their own AI and adopt that. We have formal roles in every business unit that has responsibility and accountability, but we're the enabler, sort of the culture of trustworthy AI, the tool that helps to gather the inventory of AI assets and run things like algorithmic impact assessments through that and make sure that's been done and provide feedback and scorecards to the business units. But I think one of the benefits each of us has as the privacy and AI governance professionals within technology companies is we can very actively work with product teams. And for IBM, we have an at-scale consulting business as well, so we work with our consulting team to help them think about what do our clients need, not just how do we comply within our own programs when we're using and adopting AI, but what will our clients need, what should our products look like, what should our consulting services look like to help adapt to these emerging regulations. So it's very much a nice feedback loop, and we've got solutions for clients in the AI governance space, for example, that were informed by our own internal practices. So they're much more mature because of that, because we've been thinking about it for a long time, right? And thinking about what clients need. So helping clients to adopt governance at scale for AI, generating fact sheets, having auditable documentation, all of that's in our solutions now.
Related to this, I'm curious what role or responsibility you believe you have as platforms to ensure that your systems you build are deployed responsibly by the companies that use them.
I think I've already talked about a lot of the work that we think is really important to do, and developing systems to guide companies to onboard, but also solving some of their problems, like copyright concerns, which are very big. I think more broadly, though, we have the responsibility to ensure that our systems are safe. And that happens through the kind of testing that we've already talked about. Internal testing, external feedback, creating a really virtuous loop so that we're always iterating and innovating. I think that Keith said something really important. We've got to do that with our products, and we also need to do that with our governance systems, and I think that was really well said. This is a very fluid environment, And we have to be super agile in this moment.
One thing that I think is really important that I think a lot about is that every level of the value chain, every actor in the AI space really has an important role to play in making sure that the technology is as beneficial as possible, and that it is used responsibly. So for our part, I mean, again, we've talked about a lot of these things in terms of, building models that we deploy in ways that are responsible, that think up front about acceptable use. We have policies around acceptable use. We actually just published, and this may actually be useful to a number of the folks in this audience, a responsible use guide tied to our Llama large language model. So if you go on ai.meta.com, you can find it. And it's actually just practical guidance about if you're deploying an AI model somewhere, what are the kinds of things that you need to think about? I think all of these pieces are really critically important. But the one thing that I think is just useful to just synthesize a lot of the conversations is the sort of collaboration of, as a community building solutions is really going to be critical here. We open source a lot of our AI technology in general, but particularly with a focus on providing tools to the broader community, including smaller companies, researchers, and others. So for example, if you're doing privacy enhanced machine learning, how do you have the ability to use privacy enhancing technologies as a part of that process? That's something we've spent a lot of time building internally and we're able to deploy externally. That's also true. Julie talked about the Global South and really thinking about access to, for people who are not in the United States, sitting in a hotel ballroom, and that's really important. And so a lot of the work that we've done is around accessibility to other communities. So, for example, machine translation to allow people to understand things and communicate, particularly for what we call low resource languages that don't have a lot of human-built technology to translate. And so I think thinking about working together to build these solutions and deploy them and make them broadly available is a really critical piece too.
Yeah, very quickly here because we're out of time. Have you changed your mind about anything?
I'm sitting next to Jennifer, so she's looking at me, and I feel like I need to answer. But why doesn't someone else go first? Because the answer is yes. If you're not doing this right, if you haven't changed your mind about something, and there are things where we've had learnings and we've taken them in and we have made changes, whether it's around facial recognition and the extent to which we'll allow that. Synthetic voice is a very real and powerful and wonderful solution as long as it's done right, but you must put guardrails around it, otherwise it can be a real threat to democracy. So yes, lots and lots of learnings, and you have to be agile and iterate in this space for sure.
Yeah, I would say, as someone who is a career data protection specialist, who was sort of pushed out in front of AI in some respects over the course of the last few years. I've gone through many of the stages of evolution that I suspect many others in the room are going through, where I tried to assimilate as much information about the technology as I could, recognizing I am not an engineer. There is a perimeter to what I'm actually capable of understanding. I've tried to familiarize myself with the policy issue space. That can definitely give one pause. We are looking at some really, really interesting challenge and disruptions over the course of the next decade. All of that was originally discouraging and disheartening early in my AI journey. But the thing that's changed in me is I've rediscovered optimism, right? I think when folks hear me talk about this, you hear my enthusiasm, it's sincere. I keep coming back to this theme of gratitude because I am profoundly grateful to be here in this moment right now working on these issues. And the reason I'm here is because I believe that we are actually in a position that we are capable of unlocking a tremendous amount of positive impact and good for people all over the world. So I've arrived there. It was a journey. There were certainly moments when I was skeptical along the way. We are on the ground floor of something. We are here at a moment we don't really understand. We're not pretending to have all the answers, but being part of this community with all of you right now at this moment in history, I'm grateful for all of you for being here, and I'm really looking forward to partnership with many of you over the next many years.
So can I just say 30 seconds, building off of what you guys said, because that's what I'll try to I'll at least wrap myself up. I have always thought that we needed to be flexible and nimble. So I will not say that much has changed, but I can in terms of my own thinking. But what I'm really happy about is now we've got this global conversation, and you can see the more voices that are at the table focused on this issue, the more both potential and problems that come up, because AI is very much a contextual technology. It's going to touch every aspect of every life in every industry. And the more voices you have at the table, the more we're going to be able to see both the potential and the challenges, and we have to be nimble to adapt to those. So I'm grateful for the fact that now we have a global conversation, because we've sort of been calling for that for a number of years now, going back to some initial efforts that we have had at IBM, forming a technology ethics lab with the University of Notre Dame 4 years ago to look at these kinds of issues. And it was a lot of push in and push in. This is really important, this is coming. Now it's here. And so I think that's fabulous. And we have to be nimble, but overall remember, there's a set of principles and there is a foundation that we're building upon.
Well, this is the risk of being at the end of the line, at the end of the session. I'll just say very briefly, I mean, I think the biggest thing, and you probably, I assume a lot of people in the room probably feel this in different ways. You know, as a person who, you know, I was trained as a lawyer, I've been in data protection for a long time, and so my bias is to think about risks and challenges and, you know, and all of the considerations. And I think that's, you know, we've talked a lot about that, and that's critically important. I think one of the things that I feel kind of uniquely at this moment is a responsibility to make sure that we don't squander the opportunity that we have as a society. The technologies that we're talking about here, I mean, we've talked a lot about AI in generic terms, but what we're actually talking about is like tools that help people who are hard of seeing or experience blindness to be able to see and understand the world around them. Tools that allow people to communicate and interact with people who speak languages that they couldn't speak. The ability for a small business who's running, you know, an Instagram shop out of their apartment to scale globally and be able to reach a global audience and to be able to run a business globally. Like, these are things that just didn't exist a couple of years ago. And, you know, we can go down the list of all of the different potential benefits. I feel a real responsibility, and I think all of us who are working in organizations that are working with and building AI, to make sure that we are not leaving those opportunities on the table for the people that aren't at the table for the discussions that we're having, that we're deploying the technology in a way that makes their lives better and also does it in a way that hits the responsibility notes that we've all been talking about.
Thank you very much. This has been a lovely conversation.
This show is produced by me and Anthony Green with help from Emma Cillekens. It's mixed by Garret Lang with original music from him and Jacob Gorski. Thanks for listening. I'm Jennifer Strong.